Hello, my lovelies. Welcome back to the Geek Suite. I'm your mighty host, the Kid in Her Bean, and today we're going to be talking about Game of Thrones. More specifically, about Daenerys' past. People are clearly messing with her memories, particularly with regards to where she grew up as a child, and it is widely accepted that her home with the red door and the lemon tree was not in fact in Braavos, but somewhere else. But where she actually spent her childhood, and I don't believe it's Dorne, unlike most people who subscribe to this theory, is going to be what we're talking about in today's video. So, like Philip DeFranco says, let's just jump into it. Now, there are a lot of details in the books that lead the reader to believe that Dany is having some either mixed up or messed with memories when it comes to her childhood, and was possibly lied to about where she grew up. The common theory is that she was either lied to and or had her memories manipulated by somebody else, either the Three-Eyed Raven, or Sir Willem Darry, or Quaithe, or Maester Marwyn, depending on which theory you ascribe to. And the specifics of this memory are that she recalls her home with the red door and her own room and the lemon tree, and she remembers this as being in the city of Braavos. And these specific details that she has about her home are where the reader gets these ideas that maybe she wasn't actually in Braavos. As we can see from this clip in Dany's first chapter in A Game of Thrones. That was when they lived in Braavos, in the big house with the red door. Dany had her own room there, with a lemon tree outside her window. Everyone basically agrees that there's something fundamentally wrong with this memory of her childhood and it also being in Braavos. And the biggest clue here is the lemon tree. We see in a lot of chapters from Arya that she overhears that lemons can't grow in Braavos, that the climate doesn't allow for it. It's too foggy, it's too cold, it's too far north. So in order for Dany to have remembered a lemon tree and been in Braavos, she may have been able to get away with that if, say, the lemon tree was in a glass garden in the palace of the Sea Lord of Braavos, but we don't have any evidence that that's where she was, and she states that the lemon tree was outside her bedroom window. So it is unlikely that she actually grew up in Braavos based on this fact. Our next clue comes from another description where she talks about the house having carved wood panels with different animals on them from all around the world. And this is another problem that it states that it most likely was not Braavos where she was. Braavos doesn't have wood paneling or wood decor in their homes. They need the trees and timber to keep the winds out. So to have wood paneling is very rare, and you would need to be very rich because wood in Braavos is very expensive. And given that Dany and Viserys and Sir Willem Darry were on the run and increasingly running out of funds, it was unlikely that they were able to afford to stay somewhere in Braavos that had decorative wood carvings in their home. Pull up my notes because I can't see or remember anything. Yes, so the biggest final clue that Dany wasn't actually in Braavos like she remembers, let me pull this mic closer, is things that she doesn't put into her memories when she describes them. In Arya's chapters in Braavos, when she's training with the House of Black and White, all of her descriptions of Braavos include sensory cues as to where she is. She hears the roar of the Titan of Braavos. She can smell the sea and the canals and the fish. And most importantly, the fog. The fog and mist that cover Braavos are how the city was founded. If you read the history of Braavos in Arya's chapters or in the DVD extras from the Game of Thrones series, you'll know that Braavos was founded by runaway slaves from the Valyrian Empire. And the only reason they were able to escape and remain runaway slaves and found the city of Braavos was because of this massive fog. The Valyrians couldn't, and their dragons couldn't find them beneath the fog. So the fact that Dany doesn't remember any of these sights or sounds or smells when she thinks of the house with the red door and the lemon tree is a big giveaway that she was not, in fact, in Braavos as she believes. So why does she remember or think that she was living in Braavos as a young child? The most likely reason is that Sir Willem Darry told her, and likely Viserys, that that's where they were. And this is probably for a very good reason. Dany and Viserys, and under the care of Sir Willem Darry, were on the run from Robert Baratheon and his men after the rebellion, as they were the last living Targaryens. So if they were on the run and were ever captured, it would be very easy for their capturers to glean information as to where they were and who was hiding them. if the kids were given false information, they wouldn't be able to find their true assistants. More importantly, if Dany and Viserys were ever captured and said that they were being held by as guests of the Sea Lord of Braavos, it would be a very difficult and stupid decision for Robert to pursue him. The Sea Lord of Braavos is a very well-guarded and heavily armed man, as well as being the leader of the city that holds the Iron Bank. So to come after the Sea Lord of Braavos would be a stupid mistake politically and financially for the Seven Kingdoms. Not to mention the fact that this is the city where the Faceless Men were founded, so all around, Braavos is not a city to be messed with, and is likely a good place to tell young children on the run that that's where they are. Now, the second major theory as to the reason why Dany believes that she grew up in Braavos is that there is someone magically messing with Dany's memory. The common reasoning for this is that a lot of her memories when she's falling asleep transition later into dragon dreams or messages from Quaithe, urging her to remember who she is. Now, I personally hold to the former theory that this was done as a political tactic by their caregiver to keep them safe and the people who aided them safe, rather than mental manipulation. And with regards to the repeated messages from Quaithe during Dany's memories and her dragon dreams of remember who you are, I don't think that there's something in her past that she's necessarily forgetting that's critical to her future, but more of a spiritual remember who you are, kind of like the message that Mufasa gives Simba in The Lion King.
Father?
Simba, you have forgotten me.
No. How could I?
You have forgotten who you are, and so forgotten me. Look inside yourself, Simba. You are more than what you have become. You must take your place in the circle of life.
How can I go back? I'm not who I used to be.
Remember who you are. You are my son, and the one true king. Remember who you are.
No.
And I think the closest message we get to that in the series is when we see Dany in season 7 after she dismisses her small council meeting, and then she has this little heart-to-heart with Olenna, Tyrell.
Lady Olenna, may I speak with you alone? I realize you're here out of hatred for Cersei and not love for me. But I swear to you, she will pay for what she's done. And we will bring peace back to Westeros.
Peace. Do you think that's what we had under your father? Or his father? Or his? Peace never lasts, my dear. Will you take a bit of advice from an old woman? He's a clever man, your hand. I've known a great many clever men. I've outlived them all. You know why? I ignored them. The lords of Westeros are sheep. Are you a sheep? No. You're a dragon. Be a dragon.
And that's essentially the same message that Dany keeps repeatedly getting from Quaithe, especially at the end of A Dance with Dragons, when she's wandering through the Dothraki Sea. Now, why Quaithe wants Dany to remember that she's a dragon isn't really fleshed out yet in this point in the books, so it's not really clear as to the reasoning as to why she's giving her all of these messages and dreams, but I'm hoping we're going to find that out in The Winds of Winter if he ever releases it.
Clive, what's George R. R. Martin up to right now?
Not writing.
Now, I've established that I've got common ground in the theory of Dany wasn't raised in Braavos, believing that she may have been lied to by her caregivers or had her memory magically manipulated by one of the power players going on in the background. But unlike a lot of the people who subscribe to this theory, I don't believe Dany was raised in Dorne. So if Dany wasn't in Dorne, where the hell was she? Most book readers who ascribe to this theory and also support that Dany was in Dorne use the lemon tree as their evidence. Yes, Dorne is very popular for exporting lemons, and that's where a lot of people reference when they're speaking about lemons, especially when we have the Arya chapter where she overhears the two gentlemen talking about there's no lemons in Braavos, what do you think, this isn't Dorne. But Dorne isn't the only place that grows lemons. We also see that lemons grow in the Reach and other southern temperate climates. So if we're looking for places where Dany could have had one outside her window as a kid, we're going to stick to everything with a latitude that's consistent with the Reach, the Crownlands, and further south. Another piece of evidence that people bring up to support that Dany was in Dorne and not Braavos was the fact that there is this pact that Quentyn presents her in A Dance with Dragons of a marriage pact signed by Willem Darry in the presence of the Sea Lord of Braavos and with Doran Martell. Now, the fact that the Martells are involved is another reason people believe that she was in Dorne, but there are several people in the online community who have issues with the validity of this pact, and for more information you can check out the links to those videos down in the description below. And as we've already expressed that Dorne is famous for exporting lemons, but they're not the only people who do, Dorne is also famous for exporting other things, like Dornish wine, and we see that in the Arianna chapters that most of Dorne is drying up due to a centuries-long and continually worsening drought. If Dany had been in Dorne, why wouldn't she remember being thirsty? Why doesn't she remember lots of sand? Especially if she was on the run. It would be very difficult for her to get from someplace like Dorne to all of the Associ cities that she mentions having gone to after they had to leave Braavos. She talks about going to Tyrosh and Pentos and Qohor and Lys and Myr, and she basically lists off all the free cities in an order that I don't think has any particular significance. However, much like she doesn't have any sensory memories that are tied to Braavos, she doesn't have any sensory memories that are tied to Dorne, both of which have very distinctive climates, smells, and sounds. Whereas this may be more or less moderate for the other free cities. So if she wasn't in Braavos, and she wasn't in Dorne, and she has to be somewhere in Essos that is of a similar latitude to the Reach, the Crownlands, and Dorne, what cities does that leave us? Well, looking at the books for clues and using the process of elimination, we've already stated that it was too risky for her to stay in Dorne. Hiding in plain sight, in the last place people would expect to look, is a very clever idea, but given how dangerous it was to be a Targaryen at the time, it is unlikely that Sir Willem Darry or anyone else would have risked keeping the children in Westeros. So, we've established that she wasn't in Braavos, and that she has to be somewhere below the latitude of the Crownlands, the Reach, and Dorne. So, looking at places where lemons can grow, let me see my notes, I wish I could read. We should stick to these cities, and given that she ends up in Pentos when she meets Khal Drogo, we can assume that she wasn't growing up in Pentos as a child, because if she had returned to the city, she certainly would have remembered that, and remembered that this was a return to someplace that she had already been. Alright, so without Westeros, Braavos, or Pentos, Myr and Lys are both viable options, as they are cities and islands that are south, running along the Associ side of the Broken Arm of Dorne, and are both viable options. Hiding in plain sight would have been easy to do in Lys, as this was an island that was heavily populated by former Targaryen bastards and other Valyrian blood, so these traits of having white blonde hair and purple eyes would have gone largely unnoticed in a city full of people who already looked like that. So she and Viserys could have grown up there without really standing out. However, we don't really get any memories of her playing with children, let alone children who looked like her. She mostly seems like they kept to themselves. She does remember playing in the bazaars as a child, but she doesn't really remember playing with other children. And I think that if she had played with other children who looked like her, being the last Targaryen or the last dragon, that would have been a very significant thing that stood out to her and something that she would remember, as opposed to feeling all alone in the world. So, since we don't have any memories of her playing with children who looked like her, that leaves Lys out of the question, so that leaves us with Myr and Tyrosh. And I'm putting my money on Tyrosh. Now, this is an unpopular theory in so much as I've never heard anyone else talk about Dany having been hidden in Tyrosh rather than Dorne. But there is evidence in the books if you know where to look. Strategically speaking, if you're on the run, Tyrosh is an easy place to hide a Targaryen. And we see that this is something that was already thought of when we meet young and old Griff in the Tyrion chapters. They don't actually spend any time in Tyrosh, but they take on Tyroshi personalities because it's easy to hide Griff's, or Aegon, or Fagon, if you subscribe to those theories, by dyeing his hair and beard blue. The blue hair not only hides his Targaryen hair, but it also makes his purple eyes look more blue, which again gives him more reason to blend into the background and not stand out as a Valyrian person. So, rather than having, say, Dany and Viserys go the dunk and egg way and shave their heads, which can be traumatizing to a child who's already undergoing so much trauma, for real-world examples of that, see the American Indian boarding schools, rather than shaving their heads, it would have been easier to hide them in Tyrosh and dye their hair if necessary to disguise their looks. Now, this next main piece of evidence isn't necessarily as strong as some of the hard text evidence that I have for this theory, but it's more reliant on the psychology and sociology of how people interact, which is something that George R.R. Martin thinks about when he creates his characters and the way they interact in the real world. Now, looking at Dany's relationship with Daario, she becomes instantly infatuated with him and his Tyroshi looks, his dyed hair and beard, his gold teeth, and his outlandish way of dressing. She doesn't just have the hots for him, she falls in love with him and constantly thinks about him all the time. Now, there are other characters in Dany's party who also are taken aback by Daario's looks and personality, but they're not infatuated or enamored with them. And this is something that we see in the other interactions with people who look Tyroshi, that this is a common response, this intrigue and fascination, but not infatuation. In looking at interpersonal relationships and sociology and social psychology, we see that we're attracted to what's familiar to us. So, when people in Dany's party encounter Daario, they're interested and intrigued, but they're not infatuated. He does have a very grandiose personality, and that's what draws people in, but for Dany, she focuses a lot on his looks at first. And she wouldn't be normally enamored with this in a non-fetishistic way, unless this was something that she was conditioned to be as normal as a child. So the fact that she's enamored with Daario, and there's something about him that she can't just ignore, other than his outlandish personality and looks, is something beyond that. And the fact that she has that type of connection that normal people would have with each other to this Tyroshi man, who presents in a traditional Tyroshi fashion, leads us to believe that she was exposed to this when she was a child, and being attracted to this type of person is normal for her. Then again, being attracted to her brother is also normal for her, so it's not, again, the strongest piece of evidence, but it comes into play when we're building up this theory. Building on this softer social interaction, we have evidence from the text that suggests Dany had spent some considerable time in Tyrosh. And this textual evidence comes from conversations that Dany has with Ser Jorah and with the wine merchant while she's in the western market of Vaesta Thrak. Let's take a look at this first quote. "When I was a little girl, I loved to play in the bazaar," Dany told Ser Jorah. "We seldom had enough coin to buy anything. Well, except for a sausage now and again. Or honey fingers. Do they have honey fingers in the Seven Kingdoms, like they do in Tyrosh?" Her favorite food as a child was a Tyroshi pastry, honey fingers. Now, yes, you could get these in any bazaar, but that combined with the fact that she has Tyroshi tastes in men, and some more evidence coming up, supports the fact that she was most likely in Tyrosh. Now, this last exchange between her and the wine merchant is really what gives it away. Dany smiled. "My son has his name, but I will try your summer wine," she said in Valyrian as they spoke it in the free cities. The merchant must have taken her for Dothraki. When he spoke, he gaped at her in astonishment. "My lady, you are Tyroshi. Can it be so?" "My speech may be Tyroshi, and my garb Dothraki, but I am of Westeros, of the Sunset Kingdoms," Dany told him. Now, it's interesting that Dany considers a Tyroshi accent in Valyrian to be standard, to be the Valyrian as they spoke it in the free cities. Tyrosh was established and largely remains a trading post, and Tyrosh is not a major power amongst the free cities. Their history shows that they frequently feuded with Lys and Myr, which are also smaller territories, over the disputed lands, while Braavos, Pentos, and Volantis are the major power players amongst the free cities of Essos. So it would likely be a Braavosi or Volantine or Pentoshi dialect that would be standard. And considering that Braavos has its own language separate from Valyrian, but close enough to it that Arya can sort of understand what they're saying when she first arrives there, it's sort of like the Portuguese to Valyrian as Valyrian is to Spanish. It would most likely be a Pentoshi or a Volantine dialect that would be considered the standard, version of broadcast English that would be the Valyrian as they speak it in the free cities. So why Dany feels that it would be Tyrosh doesn't make any sense. It seems that if she were on the run while she was growing up and learning to speak, she would have a more muddled accent or speak in a standardized dialect. So we've already established that Tyroshi isn't likely a standardized dialect, as it is not a major power player amongst the Valyrian-speaking cities. It would most likely be a Pentoshi dialect, and we've established that she didn't spend a lot of time in Pentos, otherwise she would have remembered coming back to Illyrio's manse as a return to the city. And it's unlikely that she spent time in Volantis because she doesn't remember any of the significant features from Volantis or talk about it all that much in her memories. So to grow up with a distinctive regional dialect means that she had to have spent an extended period of time in either one place or had spent an extended period of time with a language instructor while she was acquiring this language, who had that dialect. And she doesn't really talk about her education all that much, so she very may well have had a Tyroshi tutor who spent all of this time with her and dressed in traditional Tyroshi fashions and gave her Tyroshi sweets, which she could then identify in the bazaars, and taught her to speak with a Tyroshi accent. But she doesn't remember this person, and if this person had had such a significant impact on her cultural taste growing up, we would expect to have some recollections of this person. So, it's very likely that during her formative years as a young child, she was living in Tyrosh rather than Dorne or Braavos. And there it is. All of Dany's cultural background points to Tyrosh. She has the hots for Tyroshi-styled men, which may fare well for Fagon in the future if she ever comes into contact with him and things start to go south. He can always change his hair back to blue and reel her back in. As we've established, having a taste for something outside your cultural norm that isn't a fetishistic taste means that it is inside your cultural norm. So Tyroshi tastes are within Dany's cultural norm. She has preference for Tyroshi sweets with the honey fingers, and she speaks with a Tyroshi dialect. Well, so there you guys have it. What do you think? Was Dany really hiding out in Tyrosh rather than Dorne? Are there any details or quotes or clues in the text that I had missed? Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Alright, my lovelies, you can take the tinfoil hats off now. That's all I've got for this conspiracy today. Thanks again for watching. Be sure to click like and subscribe, ring that notification bell, and to support more content like this and keep this channel running, be sure to check out our Patreon page. We are still having our September special where our first 10 patrons who sign up get a special shout out at the end of our videos, which is a benefit usually only reserved for higher tiers, but if you sign up during our September special, you'll get this bonus at any tier rate that you sign up with. Alright guys, once again, thanks for watching and I'll see you next time. Mwah!